Yes, good afternoon, everyone. So I as you've been meditating for a while already, I'll begin this session with a talk. I'm just thinking what I shall talk about. I think I shall carry on a theme that I began in my discourse this morning, and it's the whole area of negativity. You may be familiar with the list of 3 main groups of defilement, mental defilement in Buddhist teachings, Buddhist psychology of alopa, dosa, and moha. And dosa is variously translated as hatred, anger, and so on. It's in this particular context, it's an umbrella term for every shade of negativity. So from the extreme violent anger and hatred all the way up to the slightest little blip in the mind in meditation, slightest movement away from some sense impression. So what unites all these phenomena is rejection of a unwillingness to be with the present phenomena, a wish for it to be something else. In daily life, it could be simply, I don't need this, or it could be the general sense of irritation and frustration with the vicissitudes of daily life and the things going on around us. When that negativity is expressed in certain personality types, it's more likely to turn into depression. Some people meet difficult, unpleasant situations. They become very hard and aggressive, or try to develop some kind of armor plating. Other people fold in upon themselves and become depressed. So this is the whole area of human life that I'd like to discuss this afternoon. The fundamental teaching of the Buddha, the Buddha compared it to the elephant's footprint. Just as all the footprints of all the animals in the jungle will fit within the elephant's footprint, so all of the Buddhist teachings fit within the Four Noble Truths. And in my travels throughout the world and meeting Buddhists from other traditions, I would agree that the Four Noble Truths are the teaching that unifies all the different Buddhist traditions. So in that formulation of the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha said that dukkha, suffering, arises from craving. Now, first point to make is that desire is divided into 2 categories. So volition, aspiration, and motivation, all of these factors can be considered in the wholesome or unwholesome, skillful or unskillful side. So craving is the kind of desire that arises naturally, immediately, or spontaneously whenever we lack a true understanding of the way things are. The wholesome kind of desire, in Pali is a different word for it, chanda or Dhamma chanda or kusala chanda, is that kind of desire that arises from a correct understanding of, accurate understanding of the way things are. So, for instance, seeing the reality of human suffering and injustice, cruelty, and wanting to help to do something about it would be considered the wholesome kind of desire. It's a desire founded in, arising from a clear perception of the way things are. So when we talk about craving, the cause of suffering, we could perhaps even imagine a bracket or a parenthesis with the second Pali word, avijja, or ignorance, to remind us that craving is ignorant desire. It is the craving resulting from ignorance. So the Buddha is saying that there is nothing or nobody, there's no situation that can make us suffer. Because although the triggers or the external conditions would be a strong inducement to suffer, or would make it highly likely that we would suffer, or very hard not to suffer, there has to be an element of craving in our own heart. There has to be a lack of awareness of the way things are for suffering to arise. So the implications of this are wide-ranging, profound, I think very exceedingly interesting to reflect upon. I mean, what it means is that we don't need to see ourselves as the prey or the victim of any situation, because for suffering, mental suffering to arise, there has to be some kind of inner ascent, or there is some inner condition which must combine with the outer condition for suffering to ensue. Now, at the time of the Buddha, there was the word Buddhism hadn't yet appeared in the world, and the Buddha would most frequently refer to his teachings as the Dhamma Vinaya. So the Dhamma or Dhamma, I'm sure you will be reasonably familiar with. Vinaya, perhaps not so much. And the word Vinaya, that most people are, the sense of it that most people are familiar with is of the monastic discipline. We say the Prat Vinaya in Thai, which refers to the monk's discipline. In fact, Vinaya has a much wider meaning than simply the monastic discipline. It refers to all of the ways in which we seek to create or to influence the external world in such a way as to provide optimum conditions for the practice of Dhamma. And so in setting up the monastic order, the Buddha wasn't compelled to make compromises with the existing social conventions and political systems in northeast India, he was able to create an institution which was defined by rules, conventions, which he established himself. For this reason, the monastic order has always considered the Buddhist community par excellence, in that it was set up by the Buddha, its parameters, its conventions, its culture was all established from nothing by a fully enlightened Buddha. Whereas the Vinaya for lay Buddhists is not, cannot be as refined, as complex, as supportive, and has to make so many compromises with non-Buddhist forces in the world. But nevertheless, the idea is, as far as possible, to create conditions within one's family, one's community, one's culture that support goodness and kindness and wisdom and compassion, and do not support all of the conditions that pull down or undermine those qualities in our hearts and minds. So, having said that, we begin with right view, understanding expressed in the Four Noble Truths, that our suffering can never be solely the result of the actions of others. At the same time, that is not a teaching of passivity, that therefore Buddhists should seek to deal with their own minds and prevent suffering arising in their own minds, and to take the oppressive or difficult conditions as given. On the contrary, we are taught to seek to amend the unsatisfactory external conditions as well. So this isn't an either-or teaching, or one is kind of throwing up our hands in despair at the iniquity of the world and let's just close our eyes and meditate and go off and live in a happier place, even if it's only for half an hour a day. What we are learning in our Buddhist practice is wisdom and skillful means and compassion to develop both in terms of Dhamma and Vinaya. To give a very simple example of this, many people complain of mental agitation and neurotic worries, and there's a whole kind of thinking process out of control phenomena that's so common in the world today. And what is the kind of the magic bullet, the magic pill, the Buddhist technique that will free me from this? And whereas there are effective Buddhist techniques of dealing with mental agitation, there is also the need for us to look at our life, our daily life, and see if we are creating the conditions for mental agitation in areas in which we don't really need to do that. So if you have a big mess on the floor, and you say, well, have you got a good cleaning agent, one which will effectively remove all these stains from the wood? And the answer would be, well, yes, I do. It's hard work, but it would make sense to be a lot more careful about not letting the floor get so dirtied and stained in the first place. And so in looking at our minds, it's not like Buddhism or the latest kind of panaceas in the West, like secular mindfulness or whatever the latest fad of the day is, that this is going to make everything better by itself. It leads a wide-ranging review of the way that we live our lives, including how we spend our time, how much time we spend on our computers, on our smartphones, watching TV and so on and so forth, in order to create a way of life which is, as far as possible, in harmony with our spiritual goals and aspirations, or at very least not in direct opposition to it. So the area of anger, then that is considered a mental defilement, and one which can only arise when we don't see things clearly. So I think it's common in many cultures, particularly Western influenced cultures these days, to discriminate between destructive anger and constructive anger. There's the idea that if you're in a situation where, for instance, a long ongoing struggle, say a social struggle against injustice, that anger is needed to provide the sort of energy and endurance you need to stay in and keep going in this struggle for a long period, that greed provides energy and motivation. The Buddhist critique of this view would be that anger only ever makes things worse, both for ourselves and others, and that anger is a coarse emotion, one that feeds on mistaken thoughts and perceptions, and in turn provokes further mistaken thoughts and perceptions, and the angry mind is one which lacks subtlety, ability to detect the nuances of a situation, one which has the wisdom to be able to look into the causes and conditions underlying phenomena and to apply oneself to remedying them as best one can. So the first step to eliminating anger is to want to eliminate anger, or to see the value of it, or to see it as one of one's main spiritual goals in life. So as long as we think, well, anger is actually good in such a case and maybe not always such a bad thing, then we will never really make too much headway with it, because the mind is such a tricky and dishonest organ in its untrained state, that we can always find some excuses. So we might say it's like a zero tolerance attitude to anger. Say if we think it's legitimate or tolerable in such a situation, we're lying to ourselves, and we shouldn't believe our mind at that point. So if we do see this and are interested in practicing in this way, then how do we deal with it, practically speaking? What are the steps to finding freedom from anger and negativity in our life? Well, there are three main areas which correspond to the three trainings, which are in itself, that's the idea of the Dreisikara, the three training, is a summary of the Eightfold Path. But in the threefold training, we need to train in the area of conduct, emotion, and understanding. And this is an organic and we call holistic kind of training, in which it's not step by step, but all three areas need to be addressed simultaneously. So in the area of conduct, then the tool that we employ is volition or willpower. So willpower is, and volition is, a somewhat limited tool, but it is the most effective tool for making immediate and radical changes to the quality of our life. So in the case of anger, we cannot, or it would be foolish to decide that, oh, now I'm a Buddhist, or now I'm a spiritual person, I'm going to love everybody, I'm going to be full with forgiveness and try to create a kind of a new spiritual persona for ourselves, because it's just not possible to do that. We can't change or prevent the arising of emotion through an act of will. But what we can do is we can make changes to our conduct. We can make a decision that even though I still get angry or offended or irritable, I will not express those negative emotions physically or verbally. So this is not, this is a crucial, I make a crucial distinction here. This is not saying anger is bad. If I feel angry, I'm a bad person. I'm not really a spiritual person. I'm a hypocrite. Nothing like that. What we're saying is that it takes a long time to reduce and eliminate anger and negativity in the human mind. But what we can do is, right from day one, as it were, is to make a decision not to impose these emotions on the people around us. In fact, the keeping of precepts, and in particular this first precept, we can term as one of the most wonderful and beautiful gifts that you can give to family and community, because all of us, I believe, need to feel safe. And if we don't feel safe in any way, it's painful, and it's very unlikely that we will realize any kind of inner peace or happiness. So that sense of safety and security is fundamental to any quality of life. And that if we make it clear that no matter how we feel, we will not abuse anybody physically or verbally, we are giving them the gift of safety, giving them a wonderful gift. And if you live in a community where everyone freely gives that gift to everyone else, as in a monastic order, then you have foundations for very happy social life. Now, whereby refraining from acting upon negative emotions and thoughts and volitions, the effort or the intention to refrain allows us to stop that habitual tendency to act aggressively or to react aggressively to things we don't like or don't suit us. And so the case where the thought to speak or act aggressively arises, we wake up to it. We're aware of it as an aggressive impulse because of our commitment to the training of not acting aggressively or speaking aggressively. So we wake up, we see what's going on in our mind. Mindfulness arises, in other words. And once we stop, we interrupt that habitual stream of consciousness, then there is an opportunity for making rational and wise, skillful decisions as Is this right? Is this wrong? Do I want to do this or do I not? What alternatives are there? What better alternatives are there? So that kind of skillful, wise decision-making is conditioned by the ability to stop and wake up in the midst of habitual, unwise streams of thought and condition. So this is the role that volition plays in this training. Every time we act upon an angry impulse, we strengthen the tendency to be angry in the future. This is the law of karma. Every time we let go of that volition to act, speak with anger, that anger is deprived of nourishment. It withers. And so we can see over the course of time that there is the desire, the volition to act out of anger starts to atrophy because it's never acted upon. Just as a muscle never used becomes weak and atrophied. But this is, of course, not dealing with the anger itself. And for more profound practice, we seek to systematically cultivate the virtues which most directly oppose or undermine anger. And there are many such positive emotions, but I'll pick out three in particular. One, mindfulness. Secondly, patience or forbearance. And thirdly is loving kindness. So loving kindness is most obviously the direct opposite of anger. Wanting somebody to be happy, wanting someone to suffer. These are direct opposites. So the extent to which we can create this desire for all beings to be happy is creating a way of looking at the world, a way of being in the world, which is going to reduce the likelihood that the negative emotions will arise in the first place. Similarly, before we get really angry or lose our temper, there are almost always indications beforehand that we are starting to follow, we've entered upon the path towards anger and temper. And often these manifest as tension in the physical body. And the area of tension will vary from person to person. It might be in the shoulders, in the arms, in the tummy. It can be in different areas. But if you have sufficient mindfulness to observe where the first physical manifestations of anger arise, that becomes your early warning system. And as because often the thinking is not manifest in such a way that you can have some really angry thoughts going on, but the physical manifestation comes first. And if we can catch it there, it's much easier to let go of. Forbearance, patient endurance, is absolutely essential. In fact, the Buddha singled it out as the supreme incinerator of defilements. So that's the ability to, in Ajahn Sumedho's excellent definition, the ability to peacefully coexist with the unpleasant. So when you have angry impulse or just full of self-righteousness or whatever, and just to be there with it and just to experience it fully without trying to get rid of it, without indulging in it, just being with it peacefully, that is khanti, patient endurance. It's not just sort of gritting your teeth and preventing some kind of explosion. But the true khanti is that being able to be at peace with something which we find oppressive or difficult or frightening even. So these are all areas in which we are developing positive emotions which most effectively deal with the negative emotion. But behind the negative emotion, there are certain ideas, certain ways of thinking, certain attachments, which will always provide a resurgence or reappearance of the anger whenever we lose our mindfulness or become slack and lax in our practice. So for a complete elimination of the anger and all the kinds of negativity, then we need to be looking at this area using our wisdom faculty, both in on the level of discursive, investigative thought, and in the peaceful mind which has gone beyond thinking, the mind which is both peaceful but very sharp and clear, and able to examine phenomena in a non-discursive, non-verbal mode. So that first kind of wisdom we call yoniso manasikara, for those of you interested in the technical terms, and the second level would be in the area of vipassana. So in our investigation of anger, we can start off by simple pros and cons investigation. And for instance, we can reflect upon the physical effects on our bodies of allowing ourselves to be angry or indulging in anger, and the relationship or the correlation between anger and heart disease and even cancer. The fact that when we are angry, we release poisonous toxins into our bloodstream. So we literally poison ourselves every time we become angry. So this is preliminary investigation on the physical results of anger. We can also reflect that just as one single match, once lit, can destroy a forest of thousands and thousands of acres or square miles. Similarly, one moment of anger can consume all of the merit and the good karma that we have accumulated over many lifetimes. So to develop a sense of healthy fear of anger. There, just as a slight digression, I'm always looking for more satisfactory translations of Pali technical terms, and there are two important terms, hiriotapa, which are difficult to translate because if we were to translate them directly as fear and shame, they're not very inspiring kinds of things for us to aspire to, mostly, I think. So these technical terms do have specific meanings, and I have in the past been translating them as intelligent fear and intelligent shame, and recently have decided on adopting the term healthy. So a healthy fear of consequences is my chosen translation for the word otapa. So this kind of fear, which just arises in a very healthy way when you see that a particular course of action is going to cause suffering for yourself and others. So it's not a neurotic fear, it's a healthy fear. And by reflecting on the law of karma and the terrible karmic consequences of acting with anger, then this healthy fear can come up and creates a protection against those angry actions and behavior. So that helps to strengthen the first area of training in sila or precepts. The whole the area in which we focus a lot of attention is in looking to the degree to which anger is the function of frustrated craving. So when we want something very badly and we don't get it, how do we feel? They say many people will feel angry. Other people might feel depressed. But that unwillingness to accept that we cannot get our own way is major cause of this kind of anger and negativity, particularly if we've been brought up in such a way or lived in an environment in which we are used to getting our own way. The more we take that for granted, then the more we will be offended when we can't get what we want. The sense of self is very much a factor here. When we have an idea of who we are or who we should be seen to be or how we want others to see us, then if, for instance, we feel we're at a certain kind of level, a certain kind of position, a certain status, and we expect to be treated accordingly, respected accordingly, and we're not, be a major cause of anger. So this unwillingness to be with certain phenomena, because it offends our idea of how we should be or how we should be treated, this is a fertile ground for anger to arise. The perception of self and others, the way that we create these independent, self-existent entities, me and you, out of the raw stuff of experience, is what lies behind this kind of anger at an even more profound level. There's a favorite story of mine of the man with the new boat, which he's very fond of, rows it into the middle of a lake, and suddenly there's a crashing sound. He looks behind, somebody's rowed his boat into this man's boat and caused considerable damage. The man is, quite naturally you might think, angry. How could you be so foolish? Big lake, two small boats. How could you be so foolish? And so on and so forth. So he goes back to his to the jetty, repairs the boat. It's as good as new. Sets out again, and who'd believe it? But something crashes into his boat for a second time. Second time, same amount of damage. He looks around, and there's nobody rowing the second boat. It's just floated away from its mooring. So if you can imagine yourself in that position, and you're going to ask yourself, if you were angry the first time, would you be so angry, as angry the second time, given that the damage to the boat is the same in both cases? I think that most people would answer that they wouldn't be so angry the second time. Why not? Because there was nobody who did it to me. So this is a way of illuminating this idea that we create he did something to me, and how that is the painful thing. That is the thing that brings up the emotion. Because in the story, as you remember, the damage to the boat is identical. So it's not the damage which is the question here. It's he did that to me. Who does he think he is? Or why is he like this way? And so we have this, we create this idea of fixed people, and fixed me, fixed him, fixed her. And then we have all these ideas about how they should be. They should be like this. They shouldn't be like that. They should speak like this. They should understand. Why did you do that? I told you before not to do that so many times. What did you not understand? Why don't you do? So this why? Why are you the way you are? Why do you do the things you do? You shouldn't be the way you are. You shouldn't do the things you do. And this way of thinking, which comes naturally to us, but is in fact one of the major causes of our suffering, we can see has the most detrimental effects when we apply it to ourselves. So a sense of angry and unforgiving of ourselves for foolish things we've done in the past. I think that many people carry around this sort of self-loathing or self-hatred or aversion to self, partly because they think it's kind of virtuous to do that, in the sense it's taking responsibility for their actions in the past, and that without it, it would be like they were not taking full responsibility. They got away with it. But in fact, when we think in this way, we're making a fundamental error. My analogy here is if you have a house and all the windows and doors are left open, then naturally anybody who wants to walk in can, whether it can be a good person or a bad person or a serial killer. Anybody can walk in if the doors are open, windows are open. But if the persons who come into the house go on to do really nasty or foolish things, then we don't blame the house. We don't say it's a bad house. But the cause and conditions for this to take place were that the door was left open. So the analogy here is that our minds, when they lack training, cultivation, are like houses with the doors left open, and negative mental states can come in. And if the positive mental states have not been systematically cultivated, negative mental states will overpower them. And then the consequences of that will become obvious. So it's when we say, because I did a bad thing, therefore I am a bad person, that we make a fundamental error. Bad actions occurred because of all the causes and conditions that preceded them, the extent to which we had developed wholesome, skillful mental qualities, the extent to which we had indulged in unwholesome, unskillful mental states, both in this life and previous lives, led to that particular event. And if we understand it in this way, rather than viewing our life in terms of selves acting and being acted upon, but coming to the what we can experience in the present moment, which is mental states rising and passing away, we can see, well then, we can make amends for that by seeking to cultivate the wholesome mental states assiduously, and to sincerely find skillful means to reduce and eliminate the negative mental states. So there's no room for anger here. So we don't need to hold on to anger, because it is always making things worse and clouding our vision of the way things are, coarsening the mind, and preventing us from creating happiness, welfare for ourselves, and happiness and welfare for others. So the more if we develop our meditation practice and we begin to develop more subtle and peaceful states of mind, and to see how beautiful those states of mind are, then there will also be a natural comparison, and coarse mental states become experienced as coarse, not just an intellectual recognition of them as being coarse, but we feel a natural shying away from them. And this is what we call a natural or healthy shame. So it's not a shame I'm bad, but there's a sense of this is ugly and coarse, and just moving away from it. So in that sense, the cultivation of positive emotion can also feed into the wisdom practice, in that it gives an emotional ballast or an emotional backup to the investigation. When we practice meditation and we begin to see clearly for ourselves mental states, positive, negative, neutral, arising and passing away according to causes and conditions, our idea of ourself changes, our idea of who we are changes. This isn't, this Buddhist practice is not just a way of reducing tension and giving us some kind of pleasant abiding, but it is revolutionary rejigging and re-education of our whole sense of ourself in the world, because we're seeing every part of ourself that we have created and fitted into this narrative of me and my life as only having a very contingent and conventional reality. And it's here that the root of anger and other defilements is ultimately uprooted and destroyed. So this is some thoughts and reflections on this one large area of Buddhist practice and cultivation, dealing with negativity, anger, and all of its various manifestations through the practice of the threefold training. So I'd like to offer this to you for your reflection. So we have some time for discussion, questions and answers. It doesn't have to be about the talk, it can be about anything at all you'd like to talk about.
Started off on greed, hatred and delusion, but you didn't get much past greed.
Hatred. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, well, it would take all day. Yes, so I just chose this one area. Yeah. But
avijja, because you mentioned avijja. Delusion and avijja the same?
Yeah, technical distinction, isn't it? Avijja, you can't develop a practice of awareness of avijja. It's like the fundamental condition of not seeing the way things are. Moha is more particular manifestations of this lack of understanding, or so, for instance, like mental confusion would be an aspect of moha, but not, let's say, it would be avijja. So these are all connected, of course. And I was saying, did make the point that anger or all of those negative emotions are bound up with the craving and desire, and that when you are frustrated in your desire for things, then you feel anger, or you feel offended, and it's not right, or you should have. Sometimes you feel you have a right to get the things that you want, and feel angry when you can't get them. But both that desire and that anger are underpinned by this delusion that you are somebody who will gain something. You will become something more complete by gaining a form, a sound, a feeling, an idea, an experience. So this idea that I am basically lacking something which can be provided by something outside of myself. So there are these three things are always related to each other.
In the beginning, it seemed to be that we're talking of freedom from anger.
Yes.
Practice. Towards the end, it seemed to be that you seem to say that freedom from anger happens naturally as a result of understanding, and that seems to be the sense I get also, that only understanding can lead to really freedom from anger. And trying to practice freedom from anger doesn't quite free or feel like from a doership. There is a sense of doing, whereas when wisdom leads
to so freedom from anger as being something that arises naturally or arises through a series of practices. What I was trying to point out was that we have to begin with our actions and speech, because as long as we are acting upon angry impulses, expressing them, we're feeding them. And so we never are able to develop the power of wisdom as long as we're feeding that anger at the same time. It's like one step forward and two steps backwards. Or if we're expressing anger a lot, often we won't even want to meditate, or we won't even want to use the wisdom, even if you know how to do it, because it just makes you feel worse. And if somebody's constantly acting upon their anger, then almost inevitably they'll build up a whole series of justifications for it to make it feel okay, because we need to feel some sense of self-respect. So when we act in ways which undermine our self-respect, we create a new story to make it all right. Everybody does it. It's normal. I'm under a lot of pressure. I'm this and I'm that. So apart from creating the kind of safe environment in which you can conduct this more subtle investigation, you have to create external environment which is supportive first, and not acting upon anger and living in a place where you don't feel that you're going to be treated angrily is a condition for that. Yes, the investigation, the wisdom, understanding of anger is ultimately what produces freedom from anger. But how does that wisdom, how does that understanding arise? What are the causes and conditions for it to arise? So it's not, I mean, we can say we know the answer, seeing the arising and passing away of anger as being impermanent, not self, and suffering is ultimately the way that anger disappears. But how do you get there? It's like you say, we know what the view is from the top of the ladder, but how do you get up there? And so precepts and developing mindfulness and patience and loving kindness, all these things are providing the foundation on which that kind of wisdom can really be most effective. So if you apply wisdom and understanding in an intellectual level, but without that emotional maturity that comes through meditation practice, it won't really penetrate the sense of self, which is what underlies anger ultimately. To be able to see through the way that we create this sense of self moment by moment, then that's an organic practice which requires practice both on the level of conduct and emotion and thinking and so many different things, all harmonized together. Does that answer your question or not really? You see. Go ahead. No, please carry on. Did you want to say something more? Yeah.
So, first you do it as a doing, actually you just wait patiently for wisdom to really mature and naturally.
No, it's all involved. It's all keeping precepts gives rise to wisdom, because for instance, you have a volition not to shout at someone when you're angry. Okay. So that's merely on the level of willpower. No matter how angry I am, I'm not going to shout at that person. But you used to shout at them. So you have the momentum, you have that habit. So somebody does something really foolish or dangerous, and you're about to shout at them, and then you realize, you remember, I've made a determination not to shout at people. And so what do? You just feel the tension in your body. Everything's, kind of forcing it out of your mouth, but you're patient with that. You're not repressing it, or you're just being with it and just realizing physically how it feels, and then it passes away. And that's wisdom. You can see that intention to shout arises and passes away. You don't have to act upon it. And once you have pass through that, your mind's very calm, and then you can make some very good choices about what's the best way to deal with this situation. If I don't shout, well, should I say something right now or wait for another time? Is something that needs to be done immediately? So your mind has all kinds of choices. The angry mind doesn't have choices. So that's a wisdom practice. You're learning something about expression of anger, dealing with emotions, what are the conditions for intelligent response to situations, all beginning with this practice of not expressing anger physically or verbally. Similarly, the development of mindfulness, as I said, where you're becoming sensitive to the physical cues that precede anger and being able to deal with them there and then. The extent to which the cultivation of thoughts of loving kindness inhibit the arising of thoughts of anger. You develop a new habit, a habit of kindness rather than a habit of anger. You begin to see through your investigations, after you've been angry or something, you go back and you have a look at it. What was really going on there? I really wanted him to do something, and he did something else. And so there's my frustrated desire, not because he was this and he was that, but because of the expectations and the desires that I brought to the situation. So these are all the various aspects of the way that we're dealing in a very kind of organic way, wherever in certain circumstances then the precepts come to play a major role. Other aspects, it's the meditative side. And then leading finally to this vipassana, which is a very high level, and it's only an enlightened being that reaches that level, where the sense of self and others and the attachment to mental phenomena as being self is finally abandoned. But that's a long way in the future, that kind of intuitive understanding. And so we need to be working on all the different levels at the same time. So it's hard work. It's not something that will just arise naturally. Unless it'll arise naturally when we put a lot of work over a lot of years into creating the conditions for it to happen naturally. Yeah. So this is like the old argument between slow and gradual and sudden enlightenment. Yeah, I mean it's a sudden enlightenment after many years of gradual enlightenment. So, yeah. Okay, somebody else, yes.
Is looking about anger and its sort of vibratory existence within the body. It seems to me that when we're on the cushion, kind of out in the world, buffeted, and reaction, we're on the cushion, we have an opportunity, when those stories start churning, getting going, we have an opportunity to really be able to come into relationship with the physically felt charge of anger in the body.
Yes, I would say another point I didn't make in the talk is, why, I mean, people get angry and lose their tempers a lot, well, one reason is they want to. I mean, there's always a part of us that actually enjoys being angry. And if you're particularly in a situation in which you feel disempowered, traditionally women or anybody and where nobody listens to you. Now, when's the one time when somebody will actually pay you attention? When you shout at them, when you're angry, and that feeling of suddenly power that arises. Everybody's looking at you and everybody's interested, and that's the hook. That's the hook. That's how people get caught in anger. It's a kind of intoxication. So that's one part of it. But in a meditative sense, then we can be aware of it as vibrations, as energy. And if we can take away the story from it, separate the story from the energy, and then just be aware of it physically, then we can just feel it just naturally. We can actually, you can create the perception of it just draining away into the ground in a very natural way, or create some kind of mental image of it dissipating in a natural way. So there are a lot of practices in which we can use our imaginative powers and to create stories and images that can deal with physical energy. Or in case of dealing with a lot of thinking, one of a nice technique is if you catch yourself, when this kind of going on, and just imagine that the words, if these are predominantly a verbal stream, if you can imagine those words as being written in water. And then you don't have to do anything, but it just happens naturally. Something in your brain just sort of dissolves those words in the water without you feeling it's something that I'm doing. And that's a very natural and enjoyable way of just dissolving thought. It's not like I'm trying to do something to stop myself thinking, but when it's visualized as words in water, it happens by itself. So there are many ways that you can, sometimes we think like thinking is kind of the enemy in meditation, but well-disciplined thinking can actually strengthen meditation in many areas, and whether it be creating stories and creating patterns and images which reflect the kind of thing that you want to do, whether it's a healthy, natural kind of way of dissipating negative energy or to dealing with thought, as I just mentioned.
I have a question about delusion and compassion. Sometimes, if I'm compassionate, sometimes it's just me projecting an opinion. They're not practicing well enough. Sometimes it's me projecting an opinion of them not being good enough. And that would arise compassion. And this is, for me, this is not correct.
Yeah.
And that balance, and I'm starting to think that opinions are just this mode that opinions are nonsense, but that's just an opinion. So if you could comment on that.
Yeah, well, I don't think you have to separate. I mean, the compassion is the response to human suffering. But that idea of whether people are at the level they should be or shouldn't be, or they're doing, that's something separate from compassion. Two different things.
So should compassion only be for somebody that is in physical pain and asking for help?
Not physical pain, mental pain. We're all... No. I mean, it's just as your mind becomes clearer, then the Brahma Viharas just start arising very naturally, and it's a good measure of the maturity of your practice. That when you see people who are suffering in any way, then you just feel that you want to help them to be free of suffering. So that this idea of the Theravada as being sort of very self-centered, and so I don't see that. I mean, just see that the reduction and elimination of suffering wherever it appears just becomes a natural preoccupation of the mind as you practice more. Whether it's her suffering, his suffering, my suffering, that doesn't really play a major part in it so much anymore. But yeah, views and opinions. I mean, I'm, my age now, it's like I was trying to. I like to come up with similes and analogies, and it's like now, if you can imagine your views and opinions like a ball in your hand. So now, like at my age, I mean, my views and opinions feel like a tennis ball in my hand. It feels like this, but because of my age and standing in the Sangha, for many people now, it's like a cricket ball or like it's really heavy ball. So I have to be careful, because sometimes I express an opinion, and for me it's just that much, But for many people it's like gospel truth, and it's like, it's like, wow, that's your opinion, But I mean, it's just I've been wrong. So I think surely as you get older, you just have a whole huge database, surely, of all the times you've been wrong. I do anyway, and I try not to forget all those times. And if you're somebody who's overly self-confident, you should definitely try to cultivate or to keep such a file in your mind. And if you're someone who's just the opposite, lacks self-confidence, you should open a file with all the times you've been right, and refer to that at regular intervals. Yeah, but just to see, we're always going to have opinions. I mean, our culture, our background, and so on, and it's all right. But it's more, this is an opinion. But if you find that often you find yourself in a meeting, and there's some kind of discussion, and then and you find yourself defending an opinion that you don't have anymore. Because it's bound up with a sense of who I am and how I'm seen by the other people, and having to maintain a certain kind of level, or image, and that's when opinions become, a burden and can become difficult. Sorry, was there somebody?
Is that why you should not write books?
Shouldn't write books.
The point of having them to defend this opinion that you have written down.
No, I read something I really liked. Somebody was accosted, and he said, well, what you're saying now is very different from what you wrote in a book 10 years ago, or something. And he says, yes, well, when I get new information, I change my mind. What do you do? I think that's a really good answer, yeah. Yes, so someone's asking in the Brahma Viharas, kind of the four elevated or what are they called? The four divine abidings. I'm thinking in Thai. Yeah, there is loving kindness or metta, karuna, compassion, mudita, sympathetic joy, and upekkara is equanimity. So the question is, can there be too much compassion? And then it becomes the mind is overly swayed by pity. So I think ki songsan is more like English pity rather than songsan meaning compassion. So it's one of those few cases where English has a kind of a notable distinction in this area. The reason why the Buddha taught so often in terms of groups of dhammas, groups of virtues, is because he understood the relationship between them. These are not just arbitrary groups. And when we take things out of context in Buddhist teaching, that's when we start to get confused or to misunderstand. So those four have to be taken together. And we can also say that in every group, almost every group, there will always be a representative or a word meaning wisdom or one aspect of wisdom. And in the four Brahmaviharas, then upekkara is the wisdom factor. So equanimity is not the same as indifference or neutral feeling. It's the evenness of mind which comes through profound reflection on the law of karma. That we all, at the end of the day, we are all the owners of our karma, heirs to our karma, and so on. So this is always in our back of our mind. You see someone, you really want to help them to be happy, but you know there are no guarantees. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. You see people are suffering. You're going to do everything you can to help them, but whether or not you'll be successful depends on all kinds of factors outside of your control. Not least of which is their karma, which they've created in the past. So it's a kind of a neutral gear. So metta, karuna, mudita, they're more kind of sort of positive things. You're going out. But then upekkara, you're just coming back in and conserving energy when you can't, right now, you can't do anything. So perhaps, some people really want to help somebody, and then someone who's really caught up in drugs or something, and you really do everything to help them, and then they just reject you or betray you, and then many people just feel, oh, that's it, and write them off, or I did what I could, or just feel, really, I'm hopeless, I thought I could help them and I couldn't. But with upekkara, you say you do everything, okay, it's just nothing's happening now, it's just not working. So you withdraw and you take care of your own mind. And even though, well, this is just, the causes and conditions are like this right now. But there's also within that a readiness to move back into more active mode of helping and doing when things change or when things would be most effective. So upekkara is really inseparable. It's the wisdom faculty that oversees the other three Brahmaviharas.
I'm not sure that my awareness is right view or not. One day, I just realized that I never suffered within the present. My suffering happened either in the past or future. The moment that I know that I suffer, it's not suffering anymore. And the same is true with the happiness. Even now, I know I'm nervous. But when I said I know the nervous happiness, and I know that moment I was nervous.
Mm-hmm.
And the nervous happened again.
Yeah.
So it just, for me, I just realized that in the present, there is no happiness or suffering for me. I always suffer in the past or future. I don't know how to say it. So I don't know if it's the right way or not.
Yeah, I think that it's a wise observation that well, let me go back to the Four Noble Truths again. The first Noble Truth is there is suffering. It's not I am suffering. I am suffering is not an insight into the Four Noble Truths. Everybody knows I'm suffering. But it's the I which is the suffering. Okay, so when we think, I am nervous, the suffering is in the sense, there's me, the person who is nervous. But when you're just mindful of that sensation, it dissolves, but then it comes back again. So it's, the question is, how do we go beyond that whole, what Buddha calls I-making and me-making? Because we make I, we make me, moment by moment. But with the establishment of mindfulness, it's like we step back from that just for a moment and see at least a glimpse of what it would be like for freedom from that I-making and me-making process. So it's not like, not so much, I don't think it's like present, past and future, although I can see how you would explain it that way. But it's more that when you were aware, then you weren't making that sense of me. And that was the freedom from sense of me just for a moment.
Anyone else have a question?
Didn't see you there. Self-aversion is a particularly toxic form of self-indulgence. It's the flip side of narcissism. Okay, that's the pretty harsh view. It's based on this idea of me, this person who is a certain way, who has certain qualities, and what I'm trying to explain is from Buddhist point of view, that's something we construct. We construct this idea of ourself as being a certain way, but if we come to look very closely at our mind and our body in the present moment, which is all we've really got, then it kind of dissolves. Where is it? We can't find it. And so when we create an idea of something, and that becomes the filter through which we experience the world. So with any kind of bias, cognitive bias, it's the same. If you like something, then you tend to pick up on all the information that is positive, and you censor out the negative. So if you have your idea of yourself as being a particular way, like a negative way, then you're biased to pick up on and make something out of all the experiences and things which correspond to that, and to explain away all of the experiences which oppose that view of yourself. So Buddhist idea is really to say, try to open up and to give equal weight to your experience, and to see whether that negative idea about yourself really stands up to that. So it's not saying you shouldn't do that, but saying, are you really sure that that's an accurate description of yourself, or how, for its other people? So I think that in a way, for some people, just as in Thailand, there are a lot of people who are very lack of real intellectual understanding of Buddhist teachings, but have been influenced by them, like they're in their blood. There's, for instance, a sense of generosity that permeates this culture. For me, it's an influence of Buddhist teachings over the years, and many other sense of tolerance, of diversity, these kinds of things that people have just naturally without being able to explain or to give a Buddhist teaching to support them. One of the things in growing up in the West, even in what in many cases is a secular culture in England, or even post-Christian culture, as some people call it, is that influence of idea of original sin is still very strong, even with people who don't go to church or don't feel any. And this basic idea is fundamentally, the inner, most private part of me is bad, And so you can see this if you do. Often people do some really good thing, and they've got this really kind and pure intention, and so many wholesome, good, kind thoughts in the course of this, and then just suddenly, a rather ignoble thought arises, or everybody's going to praise me for this, or I'm going to get this or get that. And then you pounce on that and you say, yeah, that's why I'm really doing it. And the conceit of the cynic is like a cynical point of view is more realistic. I'm being honest about how I really, so the more negative you are, the more realistic you are. This is some of the kind of, underlying conceits we have in the West, I think. And this idea that one nasty, ignoble thought is more real than 100 kind and positive thoughts. So if you can just give equal weight to them, then I think that without sort of saying just be positive and don't be so hard on yourself, but just say, look really closely what's going on in your mind. Is it really appropriate to have that kind of negative, or is it just a bias that we've created and we've been feeding for a long time? Because that's certainly how I see it.
And meditate and keep working, and eventually I feel that okay, I found the answer, but maybe it's illusion, maybe it's a deception or whatever. I just feel I'm satisfied with whatever the answer for the moment. The answer always means not infinite. It just keep on and on. But I like to see how you view on the same, question that you have. You always have the answer within. Is that?
Yeah. So for those of you who can't hear, the lady was saying that she feels that the answers lie within, and we just keep questioning and looking over and over again, you find answers for yourself. It seems there's always an answer waiting if you're persistent enough and keep looking and inquiring. Is that correct? Yes. I would agree. I would first of all say that I think generally speaking, we're a bit too much obsessed with answers and not enough with questions. We don't ask good enough questions of ourselves, or we ask pointless questions or trivial questions. And we spend a lot of our life pursuing answers to trivial questions. So a little bit more attention on the quality of questions we ask ourselves, I think, is very worth considering. And obviously you're asking important questions about your life. And I think that the more mindful you are, the more clear your mind is, then the more you're in touch with how you really feel about things. So there's more communication with yourself. But having said that, it is also easy to develop mistaken ideas, or to have mistaken views, or to have wrong answers. We can find the answer within us, but whether or not it's the right answer might not always be the case. And this is why we need to be studying the words of the Buddha and the great masters, to just as a check. Maybe we come to an answer and then we need to check it with what the Buddha said. And if it's conflicting, then we need to maybe go back and have a look again and to see whether we're so sure in our answers. But I think that that's a very good practice, and that inner inquiry is something which we can find very much in the lives of great masters. Ajahn Chah, my teacher, talking about his life, often informing like internal dialogue, asking himself questions. What is this? Why is it like this? So I think this is a sign of how we develop wisdom, by developing this inner inquiry. It's very, very good. But we do need some study and some reference to teachings of the fully enlightened beings to make sure we don't get off course. Yeah. One more question? 3 o'clock.
So one last question. I wanted to ask him about the military's government reform of Buddhism. So, if anyone wants to stop me answering that question, now is the time.
So, what is it? I don't know. My point of view is whatever it is, I'll probably ignore it.
Anybody else, or everybody good? Okay, Mandy, you've got the last one.
So, following on from your question, how do we know when we're overthinking something? Because we're constantly asking ourselves, is there such a thing as overthinking? And if so, how can we sort of check ourselves, or have awareness about that, not going too far in the thinking and the questioning?
Yeah, I think it's like overeating, isn't it? How do you know when you're eating too much? It's a feeling, when you start to go around in circles. I think that in many cases, it's good to have an arbitrary time limit for some really kind of knotty problem. And, give yourself a sufficient time. Okay, I'm going to give this a few days, and I'm just going to really go into it, all the pros and cons, and listen to wise people, and then just leave it for a while and just calm down, just allow it to inwardly digest, and then after a few days after that, make my decision. But I think because certain topics are just endless, that all the ramifications and so many factors which you can't be sure about, that having some kind of a time limit on it is probably just a skillful means to use to make sure it's just not going to.
Like a meditation sitting, I'm going to sit with this for a while and contemplate it.
Yeah. Yeah, and then as you jump in the bath, you say "Eureka!" and it's that kind of thing. So that's the idea. I think it's also, the thing about doubt as a hindrance is that the reason why doubt is such a tricky one is that when you're doubting something, you feel like you're being intelligent. Doubt, the voice of doubt is very similar to the voice of intelligent analysis. So recognizing doubt as doubt, doubt in the sense of going round and round and round, is very important, and seeing it as another mental state, but also to contemplate the fear we have of not getting it right, or the desire we have to be absolutely sure before we make a decision that it's the right one, and just to remind us that any decision, it's always a gamble. Even the most, you spend a week or a month thinking something through, at the end of the day, it's going to be a gamble. So that awareness or recognition of uncertainty, and that the world is out of your control, except for one very small segment of it, that I think helps to reduce the overthinking of things. Yeah. Who's in charge? Nobody.